For 4 centuries, the Han dynasty held China together, a single emperor, a single currency, a single system of law stretching from the northern steppes to the southern coasts. Trade flowed freely, taxes were collected uniformly. The empire wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and stability, more than anything, allowed prosperity. Then it collapsed, not suddenly, not through invasion. The Han dynasty decayed from within. Court eunuchs gained control over emperors. Generals built private armies. Regional governors stopped sending tax revenue to the capital. The central government weakened. Local powers grew. By the end of the 2nd century, the empire had shattered into dozens of competing warlord states, each claiming legitimacy, each fighting for territory, none strong enough to reunify what had been lost. This fragmentation had economic consequences. Trade routes that once crossed the empire now crossed hostile borders. Merchants paid tariffs multiple times for the same journey. Coins minted in one region lost value in another. Farmland became battlefields. Populations fled or were conscripted. The wealth that centralization had created evaporated. 3 major powers emerged from the chaos. Wei in the north, wealthy, populous, controlling the agricultural heartland. Wu in the south, rich from trade, protected by rivers and mountains. And Shu in the west, small, isolated, resource-poor, but led by a man named Liu Bei, who claimed descent from the Han imperial line. Liu Bei's claim mattered, not because bloodline granted divine authority, but because it offered legitimacy, a reason for soldiers to fight, a narrative that justified resistance against larger, wealthier rivals. But narratives don't win wars. Resources do, and Shu had fewer of everything. Into this imbalanced conflict came Zhuge Liang, a scholar, a strategist, a man whose reputation for brilliance had spread across the fragmented kingdoms. Liu Bei sought him out, not once but 3 times, before Zhuge Liang agreed to serve. What Liu Bei wanted was victory. What Zhuge Liang understood was impossibility. Shu could not defeat Wei through conventional warfare. It had a fraction of Wei's population, a fraction of its wealth, a fraction of its agricultural output. Every battle, even victories, drained resources Shu couldn't replace. The math was against them. But Zhuge Liang took the position anyway, not because he believed he could win, but because he believed loyalty mattered more than survival. He swore to serve Liu Bei's vision of restoring the Han, knowing the economic reality made that vision unreachable. The question wasn't whether Shu could win. The question was how long genius could delay the inevitable. Zhuge Liang inherited a kingdom that couldn't sustain itself. Shu controlled the Sichuan Basin, fertile, defensible, but isolated. Mountains surrounded it on nearly every side. This geography was both protection and prison. Enemies struggled to invade, but Shu struggled to expand. The population was small, perhaps 5 million people. Wei, by comparison, controlled over 20 million. More people meant more farmers. More farmers meant more grain. More grain meant larger armies that could campaign longer without collapsing from hunger. Shu's military was competent, well-trained, loyal, but it was small, and smallness, in prolonged conflict, is fatal. Zhuge Liang understood this immediately. He couldn't match Wei's numbers, so he focused on efficiency. He reformed Shu's agriculture, introducing new irrigation methods, rotating crops, maximizing yield from limited land. He standardized weapons production. He built supply depots along potential invasion routes. He trained officers not just in tactics but in logistics, how to move grain, preserve it, distribute it without waste. But efficiency has limits. You cannot harvest what the land will not grow. Shu's economy was agrarian, and agriculture scales with territory. Zhuge Liang had no way to expand farmland without expanding borders. And expanding borders required military campaigns. And military campaigns required resources Shu didn't have. The treasury was perpetually strained. Soldiers needed pay. Weapons required iron. Horses required pastures. Every campaign drained reserves that took years to replenish. Wei could afford losses. It had depth. Shu could not. A single failed offensive could cripple the kingdom for a generation. Zhuge Liang also faced a talent problem. Wei attracted scholars, generals, administrators from across northern China. It had a deep pool of capable officials. Shu had brilliance at the top, Zhuge Liang himself, but thinness everywhere else. When a general died, there was rarely someone of equal ability to replace him. The system depended on individuals, not institutions. He tried to build institutions anyway. He codified laws. He created merit-based promotion systems. He wrote manuals on governance and strategy. But institutions require time to take root. And Shu didn't have time. Liu Bei was aging. His heir was unproven. The kingdom's legitimacy rested on restoring the Han dynasty, and that restoration required offensive war. So Zhuge Liang prepared. He knew the numbers. He knew the constraints. He knew that even perfect strategy couldn't overcome structural disadvantages. But he also knew that Liu Bei had given him a mission. And loyalty, for Zhuge Liang, was not negotiable. The campaigns would come. The question was whether brilliance could substitute for resources long enough to matter. War is expensive, not just in lives, but in grain, iron, horses, time. Every campaign requires months of preparation. Supplies must be stockpiled. Roads must be cleared. Soldiers must be fed not just during battle, but during the long march to reach it. For Wei, this was manageable. For Shu, it was bankrupting. Zhuge Liang's northern campaigns against Wei followed a pattern. He would spend a year accumulating resources. Grain stored in warehouses, weapons forged and distributed, officers trained. Then he would march north, through narrow mountain passes, into Wei territory. His forces would advance carefully, methodically. They would win skirmishes, occupy towns, extend supply lines deeper into enemy land, and then the math would catch up. Shu's army couldn't live off the land. The territory they invaded was often scorched or depleted by Wei's retreating forces. Every bag of grain had to be carried from Sichuan, hundreds of miles away, over rough terrain. The further Zhuge Liang advanced, the longer his supply lines stretched. The longer the supply lines, the more soldiers needed to protect them. The more soldiers protecting supply lines, the fewer available to fight. Wei understood this. Their strategy wasn't to defeat Zhuge Liang in open battle. It was to wait, to defend, to force Shu to exhaust itself. Wei could afford to lose territory temporarily. They had depth. When Shu's grain ran low, Zhuge Liang had two options: retreat or starve. He always retreated. Each campaign cost Shu years of accumulated wealth. The soldiers who survived returned. But the grain, the weapons, the horses, those were gone. And Wei, with its larger population and economy, recovered faster. The gap widened with every cycle. Zhuge Liang tried to compensate. He introduced the wooden ox, a specialized cart designed to carry supplies more efficiently over mountains. He developed self-sufficient military farms near the border, hoping to reduce dependency on long supply lines. He even attempted to cultivate alliances with northern tribes, trying to open secondary fronts that would divide Wei's attention. None of it changed the underlying reality. Shu was burning resources it couldn't replace to fight an enemy that could absorb losses indefinitely. The campaigns weren't victories. They were controlled expenditures. Zhuge Liang wasn't conquering Wei. He was managing decline. The soldiers knew it. The officials knew it. Zhuge Liang certainly knew it. But the mission remained. Liu Bei, on his deathbed, had entrusted his son and his kingdom to Zhuge Liang. The restoration of the Han wasn't a strategy. It was an oath. And Zhuge Liang would honor it until there was nothing left to spend. Liu Bei died in 223. On his deathbed, he made Zhuge Liang promise to continue the mission, restore the Han dynasty, defeat the usurpers in Wei, place Liu Bei's son, Liu Shan, on a reunified throne. Zhuge Liang accepted, not because he believed it was possible, but because refusing would have been betrayal. This is where brilliance became a cage. Zhuge Liang could see the numbers. He had spent years managing Shu's economy, its military, its limitations. He knew that Wei's advantages were structural, not temporary. He knew that every northern campaign drained resources faster than Shu could regenerate them. He knew that time favored the enemy. A rational assessment would have suggested a different strategy: consolidation, defense, survival. Let Wei and Wu exhaust each other. Preserve Shu's strength. Wait for opportunities that might never come, but at least don't accelerate collapse. But rationality wasn't the issue. Loyalty was. Liu Bei had built his entire legitimacy on the idea of restoration. He claimed descent from the Han imperial family. His cause was righteous reclamation, not mere warlordism. That narrative had attracted followers, justified sacrifices, held the kingdom together. If Zhuge Liang abandoned the northern campaigns, he abandoned the narrative. And without the narrative, Shu was just another fragmented state with no reason to exist. Liu Shan, the new emperor, was not his father. He lacked charisma. He lacked strategic vision. He was competent enough to avoid disaster, but not strong enough to inspire. The kingdom's unity depended on Zhuge Liang, and Zhuge Liang's authority depended on fulfilling Liu Bei's final command. So he continued the campaigns, not because they would succeed, but because stopping would delegitimize everything Liu Bei had built. The soldiers fought because they believed in the mission. The officials served because they believed Zhuge Liang could achieve the impossible. Admitting impossibility would fracture the kingdom faster than any military defeat. This created a perverse logic. The more hopeless the situation became, the more necessary it was to continue. Each failed campaign proved the difficulty, but each failure also demanded another attempt, or else the previous losses would be meaningless. Zhuge Liang was trapped in a cycle where stopping was more dangerous than persisting. He wrote letters acknowledging the odds. He expressed doubt privately, but publicly he prepared for the next offensive. He stockpiled grain. He trained officers. He refined tactics. He treated the unwinnable war as a solvable problem, because the alternative was watching Shu collapse from within. Loyalty had become the strategy, and the strategy was burning the kingdom to preserve an idea. Between 228 and 234, Zhuge Liang launched 5 major offensives against Wei. Each one followed the same arc: preparation, advance, tactical success, logistical collapse, retreat. The first campaign began with promise. Zhuge Liang moved quickly, catching Wei off guard. His forces captured several border towns. For a moment it seemed possible. Then one of his key generals defected. The advance stalled. Supply lines stretched too thin. He withdrew. The second campaign targeted a different route. Zhuge Liang adapted. He avoided the same mistakes. His army moved efficiently, won skirmishes, controlled territory. But Wei's commander, Sima Yi, refused to engage. He fortified positions. He waited. Zhuge Liang's grain reserves ran low. He retreated again. The third, fourth, and fifth campaigns repeated the pattern with minor variations. Zhuge Liang won battles. He outmaneuvered Wei's forces tactically. He demonstrated superior strategy in localized engagements. But strategy couldn't overcome arithmetic. Shu's army could win 10 small victories and still lose the war because Wei could afford 10 small defeats without collapsing. Sima Yi understood this perfectly. He didn't need to defeat Zhuge Liang in open combat. He just needed to not lose decisively. Every month Zhuge Liang remained in Wei territory. Shu's economy weakened. Every soldier Shu lost was irreplaceable. Every bag of grain consumed was one less for the next campaign. Sima Yi's strategy was patience. And patience, backed by superior resources, was unbeatable. Zhuge Liang tried everything. He used feints and deception. He divided his forces to create uncertainty. He attempted to provoke Sima Yi into battle by questioning his courage publicly. Nothing worked. Sima Yi held his fortifications. His officers pressured him to attack. He refused. He knew that time was his weapon. The campaigns became ritualistic. Zhuge Liang would march north, not because he expected breakthrough, but because not marching would signal surrender. The soldiers fought bravely. The officers executed orders brilliantly. But brilliance without resources is theater. By the fifth campaign, the strain was visible. Shu's treasury was nearly empty. The population was exhausted. Officers who had served since the beginning were aging or dead. Zhuge Liang himself was deteriorating. Years of stress, minimal sleep, constant pressure. His health was failing. He remained in the field anyway, directing troop movements, managing supply chains, trying to extract victory from equations that no longer balanced. His body was breaking down, but the mission persisted. And then, in 234, during the Fifth Northern Campaign, Zhuge Liang died. Not in battle, from illness, from exhaustion, from years of fighting mathematics with willpower. The campaign ended immediately. The army retreated, and the question became whether Shu could survive without the only man holding it together. When Zhuge Liang died, the Shu army didn't collapse. It withdrew in perfect order. Discipline held. Supply lines remained intact. The retreat was so controlled that Wei's forces initially suspected a trap. Sima Yi, cautious as ever, refused to pursue aggressively. The soldiers returned to Sichuan without catastrophic losses. This seemed like proof that Zhuge Liang had built something sustainable, that his institutions, his training, his meticulous planning had created a system capable of functioning without him. But the truth revealed itself slowly. Shu continued to exist. Liu Shan remained emperor. The government operated. Taxes were collected. The military defended borders. On the surface, nothing changed. But the northern campaigns stopped. And without the northern campaigns, Shu had no purpose beyond survival. The officials Zhuge Liang had trained were competent administrators. They managed the economy efficiently. They maintained order. But none of them possessed his strategic vision. None of them could credibly claim that conquest was still possible. The mission Liu Bei had entrusted to Zhuge Liang died with him. Shu entered a period of stasis. It wasn't peace. It was exhaustion. The kingdom had spent decades pouring resources into offensives that gained nothing permanent. The population had been taxed heavily. The military had been bled repeatedly. There was no energy left for ambition. Wei noticed. Sima Yi had spent years defending against Zhuge Liang, recognizing him as the only threat that mattered. With Zhuge Liang gone, Wei's calculus shifted. There was no need to rush. Shu would weaken on its own. And it did. Internal politics, dormant while Zhuge Liang's authority held the court together, resurfaced. Factions formed. Eunuchs gained influence over Liu Shan. Corruption, minimized under Zhuge Liang's strict oversight, crept back into the bureaucracy. The discipline that had defined Shu eroded. In 263, nearly 30 years after Zhuge Liang's death, Wei invaded. Not tentatively. Not in response to Shu aggression, but decisively. Shu's defenses, competent but no longer brilliant, collapsed. Liu Shan surrendered without significant resistance. The kingdom that had survived through sheer force of will ceased to exist. Zhuge Liang had kept Shu alive far longer than its resources justified. He had turned loyalty into strategy, and strategy into a decades-long defiance of economic reality. But he hadn't solved the underlying problem. He had only delayed it. Genius can extend the life of a failing system. It can make the impossible seem temporary. But it cannot rewrite mathematics. When the strategist died, the strategy died with him. The question was never whether Shu could win. The question was whether devotion to an impossible cause was wisdom or tragedy.